Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the World War II Daily Podcast. Today, as a guest, we have Linda Hervieux, and she's the journalist who wrote the book Forgotten, the Untold Story of D-Day's Black Heroes, which we will be talking about today. First of all, Linda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you for having me.
Yes. All right, let's dive straight into the topic. Because you wrote a book about the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion.
hmm
And what first drew you to that story? Like, what did you uncover about their role during D-Day?
Well, I'm going to start with sharing my screen with you right away, so I can answer that with a visual. So, I was in Normandy, and at Omaha Beach, and this man right here, if you can see, William
Mhm.
Dabney, was the only, this is for the 65th anniversary of D-Day, which was in 2009. And Bill Dabney was the only soldier honored that day. And he was part of this unit called the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion that landed on the beaches of Normandy, Omaha, and Utah early on June 6, 1944. And Bill had a very interesting story to tell. And I wrote about him and I wrote about his battalion. And I thought, well, it's going to be a shame if I just do one article on these men. And so I decided that I was going to maybe do some research, maybe do a magazine article. I didn't know if any of the other men were alive. I didn't know. He didn't know. And so eventually that became a book.
Which is a great book. For our listeners, if you have the chance, please look it up. We'll include a link also in the description of this video. Yes, that's the one. Okay. So for
And yeah, and so we were all the journalists who were there that day were fascinated with this story. It's a story that we Americans don't know about on a few levels, and if you're me, you also never learned or had forgotten yourself that the American Army was segregated by race in World War II. And I was in Italy last week. Not anything to do with the book, but people were asking about it, and they just couldn't understand what I was talking about when I said segregated by race. And a lot of us on that day in Normandy were getting a history lesson ourselves, Americans and international journalists, and so that is the backstory for the.
So for the listeners unfamiliar with barrage balloons or barrage balloon battalions, what did the 320th do on and after D-Day?
So their job, these soldiers, their job was to send up a curtain of these balloons that were filled with hydrogen over the beaches to protect them from dive bombing German planes. And so one thing that you have to remember if we go back to that time of World War II, is the British had these balloons flying over defense plants and other key installations. They were flying over London when London was bombed during the Blitz. They are not designed to protect, say, a city, but they are designed to protect a small installation or a beach. And they were deemed very successful. The Americans used them for the first time during the invasion, during the landing in Italy. And they were so successful that they decided that they would be part of the invasion of France. And so they would be used on D-Day. And so the job of these men was to come off their landing crafts and get these balloons up in the air after the small arms fire had been cleared. And so until that happened, they were infantry soldiers basically helping clear those beaches and landing under very perilous circumstances.
So can you walk us through what D-Day looked like for these men?
So the assault force for this unit, there were 621 men landing with infantry scattered in 150 landing craft. And we'll talk about Omaha because that is the one that was so perilous. You can imagine, and those of us who've seen movies of D-Day, how perilous it was coming into those beaches. They were fired upon by soldiers and Nazi soldiers in the bluffs. The bluffs on Omaha were very high, and so and the tide was coming in that morning, and so you can imagine these landing craft they're pulling up as far in as they can go. Some of these men were landing in water up to their neck with 100-pound packs on. It's very hard for them. And as soon as the ramps of those landing crafts dropped, the firing began, and it was really terrible. And I tell the story in the book, and maybe I'll share my screen again so you can get a sense of this. So if we look here, well, here's an image from the National Archives of what it looked like. You can see the ramp here coming down, the soldiers, those front line of soldiers trudging toward the beach. You see these big, tall bluffs in the background. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, this is June 7th, and this is what it looked like. And you can see the ships, you can see, and the beach had been cleared of ground troops firing on, but there were still planes coming in every night that would come in for bombing runs. You can see the balloons you're seeing there are the balloons that were attached to the ships, and the Navy, American and British navies also had some barrage balloons. And so that is just a little bit of an explanation. You can see here, this is the only known photo of 320th soldiers with barrage balloons in June of 1944. And so the balloons that went to war were smaller than the balloons that, say, would have been used to float over London. And these balloons, they were about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, which is what Bill Dabney, the soldier we just saw, how he described it. And the job was, they're holding wires here. They would send these balloons up into the sky, into the clouds if they were lucky, and they would be hidden from planes coming in, and they would use a winch. So these were not like blimps, not like Zeppelins, where they were flown. Men flew them from a cockpit. They flew them from the ground.
All right, thank you. So the 320th were was one of the few combat units, or actually, sorry, the only Black American combat unit on D-Day.
D-Day,
How
yeah.
did segregation, which you mentioned earlier, shape their training, their deployment, and their recognition?
The American Army in World War II was controlled by Southern commanders. The history of the U.S. at that time, very briefly, was really a history of two countries. The South had legalized segregation by way of laws called Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws essentially separated whites and blacks, and black people they were less than second-class citizens. And they included everything from, well, of course, housing, but some of that also trickled up to the North. It wasn't like the North was this nirvana for African Americans either. But in the South, you could be charged with a crime if you say, looked a white person in the eye or tried to pretend that you were white, or there were just all of these horrible restrictions, and black soldiers in uniform were often targets for that rage. And while we might think, well, that's a show of patriotism, then you would be welcomed. No. So this battalion trained in Tennessee, not too far from Memphis, Tennessee, which was just a music hub of, jazz and blues and all sorts of other influences. And these men, and I tell a story, one of the most telling stories of what it was like for them was these soldiers would go, say, on a weekend pass while they were training, and they would go to Memphis, and they wouldn't be allowed to go into restaurants that were for white people, even though at that time there were German and Italian prisoners of war who were brought back from the European fighting theater, and they would be housed at and interned at camps, which were the same camps where soldiers who were still deploying into the war zone were training. And so the irony is, and I'll show you a picture of one man who tells the story better than I am telling it to you now, and I quote him in the book. And this is Wilson Monk, who I'm going to show you. And Wilson Monk, here he is with his friends, and Wilson Monk is over here pointing, and he tells the story about going to Memphis and trying to go into a restaurant and being told, no, you have to go around the back, and you can pick up something at the window, where there was a line of German POWs who, for reasons that I just still do not understand, were going to have lunch at this restaurant. And at that time, what was interesting, let me give you a picture of Wilson Monk with a barrage balloon. And this is at Camp Tyson, Tennessee. And here's a picture. And here are the larger balloons flying. And part of the reason that we have these two sizes is the US was quite worried about German planes, long-range bombers, being able to reach the US. And so we had these balloons deployed along the East Coast and the West Coast after Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor attack was exactly, which got the US into the war, was exactly the type of attack that these balloons were designed to prevent. What was it like for these men flying them? Well, they were learning to fly these balloons, making hydrogen, which is highly dangerous, can explode. They had to learn to navigate the weather, learn about that with meteorological science was not what it is today. It was a very dangerous job. And then with that, they then weren't welcome in the places where they were billeted. And if you were a soldier like Wilson Monk, who came from New Jersey in the North, the level where it was no picnic for soldiers there either. There was a lot of segregation in the North too. It just wasn't as brutal, and it wasn't, quote, legal in the way it was in the South. And so he was stunned and shocked at the treatment, and a lot of soldiers would be. And they would arrive, black soldiers from the North would arrive at this training camp, and others throughout the southern and Midwestern US, and be already just infuriated by their treatment before anything happened. And so the book traces their story through this minefield of segregation to Europe, where things were very different for them.
So bringing us to Europe and D-Day. D-Day is, of course, a well-known battle in the history of World War II.
Right.
Why do you think that the 320 story has remained largely overlooked for so long?
That's a very good question, and I'm asked that a lot. Why did we not know about this battalion? If you were a specialist, you knew about them. But when I say they were forgotten, what does that mean? Well, it means that books, uh, mainstream books about D-Day, films about D-Day, and the conventional wisdom knowledge was that there were no black soldiers there, or the ones who were there were in labor and service battalions unloading ships, which was a crucial job also, and an extraordinarily dangerous job for those soldiers too. But to say that there was also a combat unit there doing a mission that was considered very key, I think is also very important for the history of that very famous battle, and also for the history in as a chapter in American history. What we see, not just in World War II, where we had other units like the Tuskegee Airmen, the very famous pilots who escorted bombers flown by black pilots toward the end of the war, they were also not part of the story, not part of the history that we know until a TV movie came out in the mid 1990s that brought them back into consciousness. And what's notable about the 320th is they were really stars in their day. They were covered by extensively by the black press, which was a really vibrant, dynamic press with a giant circulation in the US. But they were also written about in the military newspapers. They were written about by white newspapermen, came to interview them as well. And their story was out there for people who wanted to know it, but then suddenly they weren't in the record anymore. And one soldier was nominated for the Medal of Honor. We've since learned the highest honor in the US, and he didn't get it because no black soldiers did in World War II. And so you have to see this pattern of excluding excluding the contributions of black soldiers. And this isn't just World War II. And that, of course, opens the question of who are our historians and who are the people who are taking notes and who are the people who are remembering these stories. A lot of men in this unit said, well, we didn't think anybody cared about the deeds of black men. We just didn't think anybody cared. And so that was a very heartbreaking sentiment that many of them shared with me.
I can imagine.
Yeah, sad,
Just, I want to zoom in on something that you mentioned. You were talking about the soldier who was, recommended for the Medal of Honor and didn't get it. Do you want
Right?
to tell us a bit more about him?
Yeah, so this is Waverly Woodson, and I will share this screen. Waverly Woodson is interesting because he didn't wait for a draft letter saying, your time's up, report for duty. He signed up. He was in medical school, and he decided in December of 1942 that he was going to sign up. His brother also signed up for the Army, and Waverly Woodson was somebody who was not only extremely intelligent, he could do anything. He really could. He was, I don't know if he was at genius level, but if you ever went to his house, you could see all of the things he built. He was really mechanically inclined. He was really wanted to be a doctor. And so he signs up and he trains at officer candidate school. That was the one area of the Army that was integrated, black and white, for training. And the reason was because the Army didn't think that black men were smart enough to test into it, but they were, and he was, Waverly Woodson. And so he trained as an officer. The problem, you come out as an officer, but if you were a black man, you could not be the superior of a white man. And also those officer posts were limited by quotas. And so there was no officer job available. There was no commission open for Waverly Woodson. So he retrained as a or he was ordered to retrain as a medic with the 320th. And that's when he would find himself on the morning of D-Day, um, coming into, well, first of all, before he even landed, he was injured twice by shrapnel that hit his landing craft and killed men around him. So he lands wounded, and he would work, he comes off the landing craft, he's following a tank in the back of the tank for shelter. The tank gets hit by a shell. It explodes. No men are coming out of the tank. They're presumably all dead. Waverly Woodson gets onto the shingle, the rocky shore in Omaha Beach, and he sets up a tent in a medical station, and he starts saving lives. And he would do that for the next 30 hours until he passed out. And this is an article where he was dubbed the #1 invasion hero by the Black press. A lot of people knew about what he did. And he was also the subject of a August 1944 press release by the Army praising him. The fact that the Army would write a press release for any single soldier, let alone a Black soldier, was extraordinary. So we found out that he was nominated for the Medal of Honor. He did not get it. A study that came out, that was ordered during the Clinton administration, found that Black soldiers were excluded from the Medal of Honor and other high honors. It was by design. There was no way that they were going to be awarded high honors. And happily, we've been working, the family, an Army historian who was spending a lot of his free time working on this. We ended up getting for him the Distinguished Service Cross, which is #2, and that was a couple years ago. And so that has been a really nice surprise. And that Army historian is still working, hoping that we can find the little bit more proof the Army may need, because they say that there isn't concrete proof that he was nominated, and they want to see a records trail, but those records are all missing. And a lot of World War II records are missing. Only 1% are retained. And a lot of the personnel records were destroyed in a fire in the 1980s. And so it's very hard to find information on these men. So
it's interesting that you mention it, because also the study you showed, I've read it, and indeed there's a lot of cases where it's like, okay, people say they created this, but we do not have the documents to back this up, so to say. People said they filed a report, but the report is missing or gone.
Right. And so, there's proof that you and me and your audience would think was incontrovertible, a handwritten note that says that he was nominated, even says in the in correspondence between the White House and the War Department, there's even a line that says if the president, if this medic from Philadelphia is allowed to get this, then the president should award it, as he has for some white boys. So it was considered very important. And based on what we know about the trail of these records, the fact that it kept getting bumped up, we think there was no question that he deserved it. So
yeah. He certainly deserved it for what he did.
Yeah, I mean, there's evidence, there's witnesses, there's an Army press release, so we think that it's all there. So the family's very happy. His wife, he he died in 2005, and he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery, where the heroes are buried. And so that was a very good day when we were able to get that medal to Joanne Woodson.
I can imagine. So I
Yeah.
want to zoom out a bit from this particular soldier and look at the unit again. And how does the history of this unit change or broaden our understanding of Black soldiers during World War II?
I think that the best takeaway from the story of the 320th and the story of other units too is that once you have people looking into the record, even if we don't have, say the precise records to show that somebody should have gotten the Medal of Honor or another sort of medal, there are plenty of accounts out there of heroism. And it's never too late to honor heroism. In 2015, President Obama gave an award to Sergeant Henry Johnson, who was part of the Harlem Hellfighters in World War I, and they served under French command wearing French uniforms because the U.S. Army just gave them up to French command when the French asked for help. And they were extraordinarily heroic, and it took something like 60 years to get, of course, he had long died, to get that medal. And in a very tearful ceremony, President Obama said, it is never too late to say thank you. And I think that we're aware of how important that is every year now in Normandy when we have the ceremony on D-Day, and the local people are just so welcoming of these very old veterans who come over from the U.S. Even this last one. And in the Netherlands too, you have an American cemetery, and you have a lot of people who care a lot about the Allied soldiers. And the Black soldiers, whether it was in the UK, whether it was in the Netherlands or Belgium or Germany, occupied Germany, they were given such a warm reception by the people in Europe, also in Asia. And it was really striking to them because they learned that race hatred wasn't a natural state of affairs, that this wasn't just something that this is the way it was. And they were so thankful and appreciative of the treatment that they got that, for instance, I tell the story of the training over several months in Wales and England, and how the local people tended to take the side of the Black soldiers when the misbehaving white American soldiers wanted to segregate these towns where they were billeted, both Black and white Americans. And even in occupied Germany, the Black soldiers were given a warm reception, and it would change forever the future in the US, because these experiences laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement. And that's why it's so worth talking about them still now. And that's why learning these stories and sharing them, and exactly what you're doing, sharing a story that people don't know about. I'll be going to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, leaving tomorrow to teach a class to teachers from all over the country that they're bringing in. And by sharing that and that story, I mean, that we're doing our part to keep those stories alive.
We certainly are. As we're approaching the end of the episode, if people wish to know more about the unit, where can they do so?
Well, we can give a link to the book. They can also go on my website and we can put a link, right? Should I do it? We can provide the links for people reading.
We'll put the link in the description of the video. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, you can go to my website and I have a gallery called the 320th up at the top of my site, and it has bios on all the men I was able to find. And I was able to interview 12 who were still with us. And this is 10 years ago, and or a little more now. And um, you can read about them. And I put in a couple more whose families learned about who heard about the book, and who said, "Hey, my grandfather was in that unit. It had to be that unit. He flew balloons." And so it's been really special. In fact, one of the last times the last time in 2019, I was in New Orleans. I met the daughter of another one of these men who learned what her father did by reading the book. And so that was really special. And so you can also get it on Amazon Netherlands, or I'm sure you can order it from a bookstore you like. It's in paperback, and it's available. And the cover that's in Europe is that picture of the men on Omaha Beach that you see, that you saw in the in the slide I showed.
I certainly did. I want to briefly add about the book. I noticed you didn't only talk
European
about
cover.
the men, but you also talk about some of the experiences of their wives. And I thought this was really interesting because it's so of course like it's military history, so we talk a lot about the men, but the environment in which these men lived was also shared with these women. And I thought it was a very nice touch in the book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, on that note, I have to then show you a picture of wonderful, um, where's Wilson and Martina Monk? So, here they are. Well, let's first look at them. So this is the picture in 1941 as he was shipping off. And I'm also showing you the church in Wales in this slide where these men were billeted before they went to the D-Day holding camps on the eve of D-Day. And then this is 2010, Silver Spring, Maryland, when I found them there. And Martina was just wonderful. And the stories that both of them had were just wonderful. And I'll show you another one. This is Henry and Ethel Parham. And Henry, this is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is Memorial Day, which is the end of May in the US, 2011, at Allegheny Cemetery, a veteran cemetery. And Henry was the go-to guy for D-Day in Pittsburgh. He was the D-Day veteran, and so he was well known among veterans, but he was the only one. The others all had a really low profile. And Henry, again, thanks to the French government, gave Henry a medal at the embassy in Washington, D.C. A couple years after that. And so that was really special.
All right. So we're approaching the end of the episode. Once more, Linda, thank you for joining us today. As for the audience, thank you for listening to this part of the episode. If you reached this part, please consider liking and subscribing to the podcast. And of course, check out Linda's book and her website. Linda, thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye-bye.